There's so much protectionism to defend the way that things are, even if we all know that that's not the best approach.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to a very special episode of Housing Insiders, the podcast for founders, builders, lenders, and regulators, and anyone who believes that everyone should and can be well-housed. I'm Jonathan Lawless.
And I'm Jeremy Potter. On Housing Insiders, we're hosting the conversations you won't hear anywhere else about how to make housing more innovative and attainable.
And we're super happy to partner with the law firm Saul Ewing to bring you these smart conversations. As always, if you have a good idea for a guest or a show or would like to sponsor an episode, please email us at podcast@thehousinginsiders.com.
And if you like the show, please give us a review and spread the word. We're finding out just how important that is so that we can make more of these podcasts and cover the topics you want to hear about.
Awesome. Okay, so I said today was a special episode, and I can't be more excited to introduce our guest today. It's Kenon Chen, a close friend, both Jeremy and mine, and also somebody who, if you don't know, you're really missing out. Kenon's just an extraordinary individual, also has one of the best sense of humor in the mortgage industry, which if you're in mortgage, you definitely need one. Anyway, Kenon is the Executive Vice President of Strategy and Growth at Clear Capital. And, while people are thinking about how AI could be used, Clear Capital is well in advanced stages of using AI to think about appraisals and things like that. Clear Capital is definitely onto something because we know there's a lot of recent changes that have been happening. So the other thing I'll mention about Kenon is that if you enjoy the intro and outro music that we have here at Housing Insiders, that is courtesy of Kenon, who is also an amazing musician. You should definitely check out his stuff. He generously gave us the intro music.
Thank you for that, Kenon, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for that lovely introduction. I mean, having the music on here, that's probably better than hearing me talk, I think. So thank you.
If you choose to sing your part, you're welcome to do that as well. So.
we embrace that here. But I thought there was, somewhere to start. Kenon, was the breaking news this week. I saw a press release, and I know there's a lot of exciting things around Clear Capital in terms of the products and the services that you've been working on, but now you have more resources, it seems like, with a PE investment that was announced just a few days ago. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about what that news is, what this partnership looks like, and then what'll that enable Clear Capital to do?
Yeah, no, it's exciting times here for sure. I mean, Clear Capital, and our focus is, offering property valuation technology, data, and analytics to the housing finance ecosystem, really. I mean, real estate lending and capital markets has really been our client base of finding ways, focus on the property itself to provide, actionable information about the property that helps people make good decisions. And we thought about that in terms of our mission, as to if we build confidence in real estate decisions, that leads to stronger communities, and stronger communities provides a way to improve the way that people live, right, and improve people's lives. And we see that there's a direct correlation, if you will, between accurate real estate decisions, building strong communities, improving the positive impact on people's lives. So it's the right time, it's the right partner, and we're super excited to accelerate things.
That's great. I think trust and innovation in AI will all come up today. So I'm glad, I'm really glad to hear that.
I'm looking forward to the next time we get to hang out so we can celebrate and you can buy us some drinks, huh?
Yeah, there you go.
All right, drinks are on me.
Kenon, one of the things that we were going to bring up at the outset is, what you've seen at the GSEs, what you've kind of seen in DC, because we are covering this sort of what, John, I guess we would call breaking news on X, which, Director Pulte announcing that VantageScore got a green light to be used for the mortgage industry. And that was somewhat a surprise yesterday. This has been floating around for years. VantageScore has had a decade-long, effort to become a viable mortgage credit score program. And then yesterday, boom, it's going to happen. And so I thought maybe, John, you could give us a sense of your take on that. And then Kenon, I know you work with the GSEs extremely closely, not necessarily always on credit scoring, but on all things advocacy and the mortgage industry. And so maybe we just start there and see what, this had been rumored for a while. It is happening. It's not happening. But it is quite a change for technology providers and possibly for lenders. And customers as well. So, John, I don't know if you had a thumbs up or a thumbs down on that announcement, and then we can kind of
Yeah.
jump in.
I mean, honestly, we could probably do a whole episode on on this particular topic, but I'll just say real quickly, I definitely a thumbs up from me. As you mentioned, this has been hanging around for a long time. I remember even back 10 years ago when I was at Fannie Mae, the initial sort of reaction to sort of the idea of changing the credit scores that get used was like, oh, that's going to cost the industry $80 trillion. But all of that is just this sort of instinctual change is bad. We have a structure that's immovable. We can't change anything. And even though this has been announced, it has been tried, it just isn't getting done. And in some ways, this tweet is the shot heard around the world. Like, this will now get done. And I don't care what the excuses are. We're actually going to make it happen. Now, I say that also being very, very aware that how credit scores are used in the industry is not a simple thing. Most people think, oh, we'll just underwrite with a different credit score. It's like, well, actually, GSEs don't use credit score in their underwriting models. They use it for eligibility grids. And most importantly, they use it for pricing and capital. And then, of course, that gets passed along to mortgage insurers and investors. And so, the structure has definitely ossified and sort of really been built around this particular score. But it's time to change. And honestly, I worry that the industry doesn't have the creativity to take the shortcuts it needs to take to get this implemented. I certainly am happy to propose a bunch of ways that we could get this done in months rather than years, but it just is going to take somebody like a Pulte who's just like, we're going to do this, and we're going to figure out how to get this done and be open to the ideas that it'll take. But the last thing I'll mention, the market cap of FICO took a huge hit. Credit scores is also a big business. The credit bureaus obviously are very self-interested in Vantage. There were a lot of issues when, Vantage was going to kind of create an even stronger presence of the credit bureaus. So, outside of just the implementation challenges, there's the political and market challenges that are going to exist as well. But this really should get done. Somebody had to make a firm, we're doing this, and I'm glad to see that Pulte did it.
Yeah, I always thought of VantageScore kind of like Hulu. When Hulu first started, it was co-owned by the broadcasters, NBC, Fox, ABC, and they just co-owned a streamer to try to see if it was viable and compete. And VantageScore, being co-owned by the credit bureaus, when their, number one partner is FICO, is just kind of an interesting dynamic. To your point, I think this is one of those things that everyone said was more complicated than it actually is. And when forced to do it, vendors will find a way and actually make it a little bit easier than we all maybe thought beforehand. But Kenon, I don't know if you had a sense of anything you wanted to mention on that as well.
Well, I mean, there's a huge parallel, right, in the appraisal UAD 3.6 upgrade, right, where there's just a mandate and a decision to adopt a new standard and a new approach, and there's always a ton of pushback and concerns and folks hoping that it slows down or finding ways to slow it down. But ultimately, I think if we can find the things, and because there's certain things about Vantage, right, that bring in additional ways of looking at data that could be really positive, for consumers. And if we can rally around those benefits and then align around making those actually happen, that would change how we work. I guess as an industry, it's interesting. It's like there's so much protectionism to defend the way that things are, even if we all know that that's not the best approach. And so I just like the idea of creating iteration and moving forward and embracing new models and working together on actually providing like a better experience for consumers. I think if we focus on that more, we wouldn't mind the change so much.
Yeah, because FICO even acknowledged it by having their own score that is more practical, is more dynamic as well. So we know this is going to open up a new way of thinking about eligibility and a new way of just looking at how people manage their day-to-day finances, which is the whole point, I think.
Yeah, agreed. Well, maybe we'll do this a little round robin style. I mean, Jeremy, you started out with Vantage, but maybe I'll kind of throw out another one because, the Vantage issue reminds me very much of something that Bob Walters says, which is that a lot of the challenge of our industry is not regulatory, but it's structural, right? These sort of long held ways of doing things that aren't required by law, but it's just the way we do it. Kenon, a little to your point, like no flexibility. There's a lot of protectionism to what we do. I'm going to throw out one, Kenon. I know it's probably a sensitive issue for you to talk about, But another one of those sort of closing costs that's expensive is the appraisal. And so I would sort of put out there that, on a purchase transaction, we should be leveraging a lot more technology, a lot more appraisal waivers, if you will, to make closing a little cheaper, a little bit faster for most people that are buying a home. So I don't know if you have a quick reaction to that. I know it's a very complicated issue. I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
Oh, I love this topic. I don't have any issues at all talking about ways to modernize and streamline the appraisal process because we've been working really hard on it for the past 7 years, I would say, where we felt that technology, right, got to the point where you could really start to bring the home in a digitized fashion to the desk instead of always sending people out to manually look at the home in an analog way and then bring some of it back, in the form of like written down notes on a piece of paper. Once technology got to this point where it's like we can actually bring the home with us, if you will, like it's like sticking it in a digital wallet. And then everyone along the line can look at that and make decisions. Not only make decisions based on like actually seeing the whole home, not just a couple pictures that someone took on a PDF, but look at the whole home in its full format and then start to build models and data around it so we could take more of a risk-based approach to say, do we always need to look at it completely again, or do we have enough data to make a decision based on the risks, situation right now? So, I mean, I think what the GSEs have done is they've now completely finished a risk-based, implementing a risk-based spectrum of appraisal products in policy. It's done. There's waivers. There's data collection only, inspection-based waivers. There's desktop appraisals available, hybrids, and we still have the traditional method of sending the appraiser to the home, themselves. And selecting the right product for the right situation is part of that whole spectrum. So to your point, John, like there are times when it's appropriate to just use data and a model to decide whether or not a brand new appraisal is needed or not, or whether there's enough data to make a decision right then and there. And then if you do send someone to the house or you do need to go and collect new data, we now have the technology to collect that data in its entirety in a digital format in a way that feeds the next accurate decision. Embracing all those tools, right product, right time, right place, right situation, should be how we're thinking. The idea that we're just going to stop all change and stick to a one method when we have all these tools and data available at our disposal doesn't make sense.
But I guess my comment was meant to say like we're not going far enough when we can, and I'm sensitive to the counterpoint here too, which I think there was just a recent headline in the Wall Street Journal saying CEOs are finally saying AI is going to replace jobs, and this isn't AI, this is like just just normal data usage. But of course, you have a whole industry of people that rely on actually doing physical appraisals for their jobs. I guess what I'm suggesting is that we could go further and eliminate more jobs, eliminate more costs, given the data and the technology we have today. But I understand that we've got to be patient and slow as we try to transform an industry. And not that those jobs will go away, they'll be replaced by potentially other desktop appraisal jobs, other technology jobs. But I certainly think that could happen a lot faster.
Sure. I mean, we have this massive change going on right now to update the appraisal standard to UAD 3.6, which basically just means that, there's a lot more data points. It's moved, from a lot of what was kind of like a lot of subjective commentary and writing moved to like more specific, targeted, enumerated, if you will, data points on what's happening in support of the appraisal. I think that transition is an important milestone because it gets us to like change the structure of how we think about the appraisal, not as a document, but as a set of data that is built to support decisioning. So we kind of have to get over that hump of like moving away from like what could have been written on a piece of paper in narrative form to something that's actually designed for the new digital age so that we can have the type of risk-based options that you're talking about, John. So this is a huge next step, and I think it's the right next step. And then, for smaller balanced loans, 400,000 and less, that's why you are seeing AVMs being used a lot more because of the accuracy improvements that have been made in automated valuation models and the rich set of data that they have access to now.
There are challenges, and Kenon, you and I have talked about a lot of these different ones. Like, for example, we did a program at Fannie Mae, or we tried to do a program where it was sort of helping do renovations for solar panels. But then we got into this really challenging situation where it's like, okay, you just put a $60,000 piece of equipment on top of the roof of this home. It's going to cut energy costs by $100 per month, and we have no idea how to appraise it. Well, I mean, what the fuck? I mean, that's not a hard problem. But to your point, like, if appraisers were thinking about those issues and spending more of their time versus appraising a purchase transaction where there are 20 bids and the purchase price 95% of the time is going to be, the appraised value. Anyway, like, you get my point. Like, why are we wasting time there? And Jeremy, much like what you're saying, get the specialists to think about these harder challenges. Not to mention various sort of split style living. How do you value an ADU? How do you value a split condo? Like, all these types of interesting questions. We don't get ready answers from the appraisal industry because they're running around walking through homes when they don't need to be.
I mean, what's wild is like even like the current modernization tools that are there, which honestly haven't been adopted fully yet, right? We're still in the single digit percentages really of adoption of some of the new, modern programs, available. But even with that, there's been billions of dollars saved for consumers, over the past 5 years. And there needs to be, if you will, also willingness and cooperation by lenders, to be willing to adopt these programs and focus on the benefits that they provide the consumer. It's like there's more valuation certainty up front. There's reduced cost to the borrower, and that's just what we have today. Like when we start talking about AI, and like that would be my topic I would throw into this conversation, which I think you just said it, John, which is some CEOs now are finally talking about how AI is really going to impact how we work and the workforce. I think it's time for us to have a more open, honest conversation about what a post AI world looks like. And there's a great quote from I think one of the first chief AI officers that worked on the IBM Watson project, and she said that they thought about commercializing AI not to be clever, but because of four things. Because some jobs are too risky for humans, some tasks are too mind numbing, some conditions are too toxic, and some decisions are too complex. And I love those four because, like, if you start to kind of go after what it is that AI is trying to do, it takes this focus off of like, is AI trying to replace people or not? It's like, well, let's have a different conversation, because it's more about what is it we're trying to do with AI that we can't do today, that opens up new possibilities. And yes, that means that like the jobs and functions that we have today are probably going to be disrupted in some way or need to be reimagined or rethought out, what functions are needed if AI does all those things I just said. But that's where our focus should be. And we need to have a transparent conversation about what that looks like instead of this, like, is it going to replace people or not? I think that's actually a distracting, wrong way to look at it.
Yeah, I think the way that you put it just now is the key question. How do companies, especially companies in our industry, dedicate time, resources to thinking about this so that they can approach it proactively and strategically? My fear and my criticism has always been a lot of companies that I work with in particularly the mortgage industry are not proactive or strategic just by their cultures. They're reactive sales organizations because the transactional model of real estate is a reactive model. And everything we just talked about leading up to this question was, how do we make it more proactive? How do we make property valuations, property appraisals more proactive? So I think this idea that, and this is pretty ambitious, so I'll throw it out there, I'm probably wrong, but the idea that AI could help us be more proactive when it's not our natural state. Our natural state is not proactive. Our natural state is reactive to whatever's urgent, whatever's in front of us. Our human nature is reactive. And to be proactive does make you differentiated from others in the market, in your life. Like it's hard to do. It takes discipline, it takes time, it takes resources. So could AI help us kind of overcome our natural state and be more proactive? I think what you're saying is yes. But boy, is that ever a ambitious goal.
It's in some ways it's aligned a little bit with what Kenon was saying. And I wish I wrote those 4 things down, Kenon, because I think that was super insightful. But like being proactive, Jeremy, to your point, is first of all, in our world, it's extremely complicated. I mean, just take the VantageScore change as an example. It's just so many variables for our brains to handle, so many interested parties. Maybe AI is a solution to that. Not to mention, a lot of times being proactive is doing the most mind-numbing, boring types of things. And again, like who's going to willingly say, "Let me go do that"? And AI is the kind of thing that might say, "I'll go do it." I very much appreciate that kind of thought. Let me throw out one thought on this AI topic too, just related to the job loss. I was reading about an interesting paradox called the Jevons paradox, Jevons. Highly recommend checking it out. But basically, he said, the more efficient you get at something, at utilizing a resource, the more you end up using that resource. And so, as a very common example, like energy becomes more efficient. You can drive your car and it costs you less. You have to use less gas. Well, wow, it's cheaper for me to drive my car. What am I going to do? Drive my car way more often. And as a result, the very thing you're trying to save, you kind of end up increasing the usage of it. So one of the things I've been observing about AI is that in some ways you can think of AI as a resource of thinking, right? And now thinking has just become cheaper. And what I wonder whether or not the fact that we have AI as a tool to do is that we're going to use it way more often to think about things we've never thought about. And that's going to, instead of reducing the number of people we need, like, one would sort of assume, there's actually a paradox. You need less people, but because AI, you're going to need more people, because you're just going to need more people to respond to the type of proactive thinking, Jeremy, that you mentioned, or the type of insightful thinking that we just don't have access to. I'm saying that in a positive way. I also mean it in a very negative way, in which case, like, the amount of page-long things that people write that I look at, I'm like, another fucking chat GPT response to a prompt. I got to read this damn thing. Like, we're just starting to create a lot more interesting, potentially, or not interesting thinking that's just going to require a lot more people. So anyway, that's my little controversial thing, is that AI is going to increase the need for people rather than lessen it.
I love that concept. It was similar to the concept around the cost of storage. I think it was, this is earlier in the 2000s, but Shutterfly, right, did a study around as you reduce the cost of storage for images, image sizes were getting bigger because they're more detailed, right, and higher resolution. That people started taking more photos, right?
Right.
So as they didn't actually have to like pay to process photos or pay an account to store photos, and it was just included with their, on their iCloud or whatever. People's usage of taking more and more photos like kept increasing and increasing, and then, oh no, the selfie was born, and like now we have to deal with that, but right, like we we have, I think that concept is true. And so if you thought of it that way, where the cost of intelligence, right, just got more accessible, and you can make more use of intelligence without paying $900 an hour for someone who specializes in that, or, right, like you can actually pay for an attorney without paying for an attorney, right? Like people are using it for contract review and for all these things that typically you'd have to, pay for training and intelligence on. There's actually a lot of benefits to that, and that, yes, you're right, like it doesn't reduce the workforce. It means that we just like go faster and faster and faster to solve things that we wouldn't have tackled before. And God forbid we create another version of the selfie. Look at me using chat gpt.
Hey, and if you've seen all of Jeremy's selfies, you'll know it's pretty good. I mean, he's gotten very, very good at it.
It's a contribution. It's a contribution to the world.
I don't know to who, Kenan, but I don't yet have my avatar, my AI avatar fully loaded. So I guess that'll be the AI version of the selfie.
I know I'm going to get text messages after this. I'm just going to have to deal with it. Like, thank you, Jeremy.
Well, it's interesting, the thing about photos. I was just thinking that, like, we take so many photos, it would probably take 10 years to just look at the photos we've taken, which is sort of like, what's the point? But again, it just like, now we can have intelligence. Like, I mean, lawyers doing all these things, but that just generates something that somebody's got to look at. It generates action that somebody's got to do. And it's just going to mean more people, more cost, maybe for the better, but I fear that oftentimes it's going to be for the worse.
Like, I'll give you a quick example on the legal side of where it may generate more people, but those more people might be able to do something higher and better, which is we're starting to see a lot more templates, like industry agreed templates for commonly transacted type things, right? So VCs is a good example. The safe agreement, the Y Combinator safe agreement has now become like the default agreement. I bet you millions of companies use it, and you don't really need a lawyer to look at it that much. There's probably 2 sections you need somebody to look at because everybody's agreed, all right, this is the industry standard for VCs for an agreement of this type for this type of company. And so I think it's really interesting to think of what that will do to housing and real estate in particular, who uses the MLSs alone probably have 350 different templates of all different slight variations. And so as we think about, like, John, standardizing the right stuff, to your point, that can be standardized in a template, and then knowing what shouldn't be. And that, I think, is going to be where people come in, is like, we should templatize this. This should be up to AI, even with legal implications, but these things cannot be or should not be. And that's going to be where it gets really hard, is which ones fall into which bucket.
Yeah, every time I get into these conversations around the impact of AI, I always want to go back to, yeah, but do we have our priorities straight? Do we have our mission? Do we have a mission worth achieving? Like, have we thought about what it is we're really trying to do? And in housing, is like, are we taking it all the way back to the whole point of this thing, which is to reduce the friction in people being able to own a home, or people to be able to have sustainable home ownership? It always goes back to the people at some point, and that becomes kind of our guiding light, if you will, for whether innovation and change makes any sense and is worth it or not. Like, even John's example of driving cars more, because of the cost of energy reduces. That's because people get enjoyment and can live their lives more freely if they drive their cars more. It connects, it makes 2 points shorter, the distance between 2 points shorter, which means that they can, like, visit their family more, they can go on vacation, they can, all the things that came with that kind of freedom of that people started using more, is because it actually did something for their lives that they felt was valuable. And we can't lose sight of that in housing, even though it's really easy to get trapped into the mud and mire of the complexity of it.
Well, if you take it all the way back to everything in real estate is local, and John mentioned earlier the structural issues, I guess we do have, and I'll use like buying a house as the example, we do have still a lot of structural issues that are based on you actually knowing the 4 or 5 people in your community who are part of the transaction, right? There was a time when you knew the person at the bank giving you the mortgage, you knew the real estate agent personally before the transaction, you knew or related to in the community the title person or the lawyer or the appraiser. So you just saw it as going to a local business in your neighborhood anyway. That's how you saw the transaction. I don't know if this is true because I wasn't around then, but maybe the 6% commission wasn't that big of a deal when it was still kind of seen as all in the family. It's all in the community. Like, they buy from me on my other thing. So it doesn't matter that I'm using them to buy their house because they're a customer of mine 5 days a week in my other business that I have. And so when we all knew each other in this little community, and then we've kind of kept that myth alive and the cost structures alive when it's not even true anymore. And it's had these like lingering effects into trying to change the cost structure of a home, buying a home, trying to change the purchase appraisal, trying to change how offers come in. I mean, to keep this going, but also to keep the round robin alive, like, just look at all the offer data on all the houses across the country that we never know about. 20 offers, we only know about one publicly or as lenders or as an industry. And so if you just, for instance, John, used AI to open up offer data on purchases, just to open it up, just to make it transparent, lenders in the GSEs could just know the fair market value of a home immediately. You know why? On a purchase with 20 offers, it's the second highest offer is the fair market value. If we're doing fair market value and lenders want to think in fair market value, if the lie we're telling ourselves is that we care about fair market value on the lending side, if we do, we could know it. The data's there in the universe. We just don't unlock it. We don't make it accessible. somebody hoards it or discards it. And I think a lot of it's been discarded. So my topic, Kenon, was why do we have purchase appraisals at all if we can't just look at more than 3 offers where everybody's represented by a real estate agent? Great. Second highest offers fair market value. That's lendable. It's safe because we know somebody who didn't win the house would have paid for it. Let's move on.
If the guidelines are written that way, I think that would be one thing, but the home is considered somewhat holistically though, right? I mean, yes, market value is the key number, but from an investment risk, and risk standpoint, I think there's a lot of other aspects that we have to solve, right? Which is like, again, how do we make sure that that home is considered holistically in its condition and quality and all the other things that might, create concern.
Meaning the condition and the fair market value are not the same thing, is kind of what you're saying. There needs to be a distinction there for systemic purposes.
I think so because offers are not always based on the same criteria that risk is assessed from a lending standpoint, right? So yes, there is an agreement, if you will, between like the willing buyer, willing seller, especially if you had an understanding of like all of the potential buyers. But that's not the only part of the decision when it comes to a risk decision for the lending portion of it. So somehow we have to suss out the different for that to work. We have to suss out the difference between what is an offer made for other reasons besides just the current value of that property.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Although something that we've talked about is that when you get like when somebody purchases a home, say for $300,000, and the appraisal comes and confirms that purchase price, if I'm guaranteeing that loan, like what I really want to know is like if that loan defaults tomorrow and I go to sell it, how much am I going to recapture in terms of the sales? And we all know that baked into the fair market value is the fact that, well, it was the best bid. The second best bid is not going to be $300,000. It's going to be less than that. So certainly, unless another person comes along and wants to offer the same thing, we know there wasn't one. It's going to sell for lower. And then you've got 6% realtor fees to pay. So, any loan that's made today on a $300,000 property has to know that when you turn around to sell it, you're only going to really make 280,000. Like you're in the hole day one. But on the other hand, if you look at the severity models out there, like they sort of capture that from a risk perspective, right? So again, what I'm trying to get at is the interplay between how we appraise things up front and how we price things based on the risk. And my point is, like, today we have the practice of appraising things at a fair market value that is a mythology. It's not real. It's not really what you can sell the property at the next day due to subtleties you mentioned, Keenan, or other, all the sort of tactical cost reasons. But it kind of doesn't matter as long as when you're ensuring that process, you know that you're going to lose 20% on day one. And then it kind of gets to the point, well, okay, we're requiring down payments because we know day one, I'm already going to lose some money. So I need that cushion from the consumer. Whereas if the fair market value was truly what it was, 280 or 270 in my example, you don't need a down payment on that because like now you've got the right resale value. You don't need a cushion or as much cushion per se. Again, that's putting aside the consumer-based risk. But does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. Like the low hanging fruit in all of this is ensuring there's more consistency, right, in the approach to value and more consistency in capturing the data that's supporting that. We have so much low hanging fruit with that. I mean, one of the things that we're trying to solve, right, is, for instance, what is actually ground truth? Like, what is that based on? Is it based on, is the value based on what's in public records? Is it based on what the realtor said the property is? Or is it based on what is actually there, on the ground in an accurate, capture format? I mean, the idea that like we didn't have an agreement on how to measure a home to determine its, gross living area versus its total square footage, that wasn't a standard a few years ago. That's odd, right? We know how important price per square foot is in determining value, and yet there wasn't even alignment around the industry on exactly how to determine what should be a pretty standard scientific mathematic, calculation. We've got this great, like I said, like this great stuff that we can dive in and solve like right now using technology that within our industry we didn't have to develop. We just need to grab what's been innovated by big tech and bring that into what we're doing and adopt what's there. If we had lenders adopting, I think, the programs that are already put forth, you would see a lot more consistency across the board to where this would be less of a concern.
I hear you, Kenon, and I think that's a very mature, smart, incremental way of thinking of doing things.
Dang it.
Okay.
I went ahead
That is
and
not
sure again.
that is not what this podcast is about. All right.
Today's sponsor is Saul Ewing. Consumer financial services companies face a constant onslaught of litigation and risk arising from a multitude of federal and state consumer protection laws. They also contend with enforcement actions from federal and state regulators and agencies. So navigating these obstacles while managing legal costs in today's crowded and shifting market presents unique challenges for these institutions. Attorneys at Saul Ewing's Consumer Financial Services litigation practice are sensitive to these challenges and provide their clients with practical, industry-specific advice and counsel. To learn more, go to saul.com and look under capabilities.
I just want to reiterate what Jeremy said. If I have a purchase transaction in which there are 3 offers on it, I don't give a fuck about the square living space. Okay. I know I don't need an appraisal. I don't need it. It's like, that's an easy solution, right? Like, you can get your rulers out and you can get your drones to measure the quality of the carpet. I don't
No
care.
drones. No
You know,
drones.
like, again, and I think that's the kind of thinking that we might be allergic to. But again, like, a camera equipped drone that has an AI bot behind it with 3 offers, I'm like, why is this whole, like, why do we have to create databases? Like, just forget it. I know that's a little extreme, but hey, that's what we like to do.
Well, it goes back to what you were saying earlier, Kenon. What are we solving for? If AI gives us the opportunity to step back and ask, what are we solving for? John's point is innovation shouldn't be solving for a more complex way to capture this already complex data. Innovation should be solving for, how do we actually get the best path for the entire system to secure that transaction, move on, and get the next one going. To your point about driving cars more, if real estate transactions were less costly and less painful, we would probably do more of them. Everyone would appreciate it, because what we might lose in your tiny little compensation adjustment, you'd make up for in the fact that a family now felt enabled to try it, to try that new town, to try that new townhouse, to try that new neighborhood across the street. Like, we know people don't move all that far. Generally, we have data on that. And so we just make it so complicated that then we end up resisting or obstructing the thing we were trying to do, which is get people to move more.
Well, the other aspect, though, is that we sometimes we think too short term about just that one particular transaction, and we don't think about how that gets serviced downstream, right? We don't think about the fact that, it really is the capital coming from the secondary market as well, and how they, need to fuel what they're doing from an investors and, securitization, all the things that happen. Like, this idea of the data is not just for that one point in time decision. That appraisal, or what is used to assess it at that time, is like, if it was a more of a living digital representation of the real world, if you will, that could travel with the life of that loan, I think every stakeholder would benefit downstream, and we'd be reducing all of the, like, rework that we do over and over and over again. There is something, I hear what you're saying, but there's also something about getting a pristine record so that every single stakeholder doesn't do the whole, let's re-extract the data again and build yet another database, and then question the data that we knew was flawed to begin with, and, like, look at that again and say, well, how come this doesn't match public records? I just think that we need to think about the entire process all the way through in order to decide whether it's the right thing to eliminate something or to have a more pristine version of that data.
Yeah, that's right. And, a key thing of innovation is, like, is this sort of outside of the box thinking, which is like, if you're a taxi company, you're thinking, how do I make taxis better? And you're like, well, we really got to get the meter to be really accurate, and we got to get the taxi meter. Like, you can get really trapped in sort of like the way things work versus, so let's take a step back. Why do we got GPS? We don't need meters anymore, like, and so that's the kind of, like, are we moving quickly enough into that world? And what I would argue is that we live in a world that's so structured and it's so fixed around the way that it's expected to work today that it's so hard to get outside the meter reading. And Uber can't come into this market because it doesn't have access to the capital like the rest of the market does, and it should. It would be great if it could, but I think in some ways we got to balance we're stuck with the meter to some degree, but slowly let's get our thinking outside of that. And I think, again, the incremental mature way of thinking is the right way to do it. But again, it's if we have our eyes on the future and are asking these hard questions like, why are we doing this anyway, like what are we trying to accomplish here, I think that'll keep moving our thinking more in the right direction, which obviously, Kenon, you've been a key part of for several years. Kenon, maybe I'll give you the opportunity to kind of make a last question statement, thumbs up, thumbs down. I know you think a lot about our industry, and you probably have talked enough about appraisals and home valuations in your life that maybe you want to throw something else out there. So I'll give you the floor.
I'd pose the question, because you talked about whether Uber or outside thinking can come into the industry or not. And is it still possible to take big swings in housing innovation, like to swing for the fences? And is it possible to make those big leaps, or are we in a place where now we're just baked into small iterative changes over time? And I think about this question a lot because we're a company that wants to take those big swings, right? We very much are driving towards what's next, innovation wise, and we've never accepted status quo. And I believe that, like, if we innovate fast enough within our industry, it reduces the likelihood of a outside disruptive force, coming in. But it does require taking some bigger swings, right, and moving at a different sort of pace. So, is AI the thing that unlocks that? Is the thinking there? Is the capital there? Curious what you guys think.
Well, I can't say no, because I think if you had asked me yesterday, this is like a day-to-day question in 2025, is, I may have said no yesterday, but today I'm going to say yes. And here's why. I think that we get to talk about it as big, and we get to determine what a big swing looks like. And what I mean by that is we can actually take what we would consider a big swing and make really significant measurable progress against the problem. It's not going to look the same as it looks in other industries like tech or something like that, but we get to say that if we do this thing together, it will actually be a big swing. And then we have to pull the pieces in and show everybody what's in it for them and how they can do it. But I do think that that's possible. There's a couple reasons why. I think technology has slammed together pieces of the housing ecosystem that were traditionally separate or siloed. And so it still takes time to get familiar with it, but we have much more interaction. And actually, honestly, part of the thesis for this podcast was like, how do we get more of that? How do we drive more of that? More of the different silos being forced together by technology or by demand or by the market to make these changes. So I do think that's happening. So part of my yes is that. And then two, I actually think a lot of housing has resisted change because it wasn't forced to change. The demand wasn't strong enough. It wasn't unified enough. And the other thing that's happening is we've now unified the demand side, for better or worse. In one case, it's exacerbated the crisis in housing prices. But on the other side, it's given builders, policymakers, politicians a much better view of how many people still want to own a home. It's like there is a knocking at the door that I think is louder than it was before, which theoretically should motivate big swings. So I think those are the two things I'm thinking a lot about to answer yes.
I too will say yes because I have to, but I will make a very controversial statement. Maybe it's not that controversial. We won't see any big swings be successful until we break the sort of monopoly of the Fannie and Freddie world. As long as Fannie and Freddie hold the keys to the capital markets and everyone is beholden to their rules, it will be very hard for anyone to innovate around those. I'll just, like, as an example of this thinking, we had the financial crisis, and then a bunch of people got together and created this thing called QM, right? Like, hey, you should make sure that people can repay their loan. And I think we were sort of allergic to like being hyper specific about how you do that. Like, you must have a DTI of X. But instead, it was like, you have a responsibility and obligation to do that. And if we find out that you haven't, and that kind of created this gray space. So what happens in a gray space? Well, somebody comes in to define it. And who was that? There's the GSEs. And the GSEs came in and gave the most boring, complicated, specific, prescriptive way of meeting an ability to repay requirement. Like, it is mind-numbingly complicated and overdone, and leaves very little room for somebody to say, hey, look, I'm going to underwrite a little bit differently. I'm going to collect documents a little bit differently. And look, my loans are going to perform. Like, let me just show you that they're going to be able to perform. I'm doing something that every human being would consider a reasonable way of ensuring somebody can pay their loan. Let me do it. But right now, like, the answer to that is absolutely not. And the GSEs have zero incentive. They're not competitors. I mean, look at their names. They're the same name, basically, right? They're not competing with each other to find better ways to do that. So I think that creates an immense obstacle to anyone who wants to innovate in this space. And insofar as that obstacle exists, yeah, we'll have little swings, maybe big swings around the outsides of what they do in different markets or different subsegments of the market. But in the sort of standard single family space, every single big swing I've seen is a fly ball caught by the center fielder, Fannie Mae, or the right fielder, Freddie Mac, and it's an out.
What about the home equity space, though? Is that the place where innovation like starts? Because we have so much available tappable equity right now with something like $11 trillion, 33, $34 trillion worth of equity sitting out there. Like, is that now a big enough market, if you will, to allow certain innovations to take hold there? And then once they're kind of proved out, could make the leap?
I do think one thing about it that's interesting to me is it's an asset that is different than the first lien debt product. And what I mean by that is the first lien debt product, Fannie and Freddie own it, right? The investor owns the risk. You're paying it back. In the home equity space, you can do a lot more with what is an asset versus a liability, what's true equity versus what's a debt, and I think that does actually change the game a bit because the rules are different when you're not working in debt, as an example. But I do think it also makes it fraught for fly-by-night ideas or bad actors because it's so big of a number, $33 trillion, that everybody's going to run at it, is running at it. I shouldn't say gonna, is literally running at it in real time and sifting through what the big swings are that are viable versus this sort of flash in the pan stuff just because of a moment in time in the market is really difficult.
Yeah. And remember, Fannie and Freddie don't allow for second liens to be generated on top of their first liens. Now, of course, we know this happens all the time in the home equity market. But again, you've got these big major players that have sort of a rule against it. And if you're a lender or somebody who doesn't want to take on lots of regulatory risk or risk of, losing favor with the GSEs, like, you're just not going to do it. I mean, you are pointing to an interesting market, and there has been some innovations, and I'm certainly very excited to think about ways that people can leverage their equity to do things like build ADUs or plan for the retirement, so on and so forth. I think there's great opportunity there, but there's nobody facilitating the sort of, number one, hey, this is safe. Number two, there's like meaningful capital markets behind it. If the GSEs were to step in, or somebody like the GSEs were helping securitize, I think it really would have the opportunity. We've seen some securitization, so I do think there's interesting opportunity there. But again, the pressure of the market isn't one that's going to be super supportive of it. And unless you've got some commonality or consistency, some support from these major players in housing, I just think you're just fighting an uphill battle to get those things adopted in the way that they should be.
Kenon, thank you for joining us. Oh, sorry,
I know we can't end it a sour note. Let's, Kenon, when's your next album? Actually, let me ask this question, Kenon. So I mentioned that you're a musician at the top. Tell people where they can find your music.
Yeah, it's just under my name on all of the on your favorite streaming platform, whatever that may be. The kids these days are more Spotify. No one talks about Apple Music. That's for the old folks. It's fun to stay inspired, and I find it like that creativity keeps me thinking a little more outside the box in my day job too.
Any new albums coming out?
I just released the album back in May, and I'm thinking about what comes next, but enjoying that one for a little bit before I get too much into recording.
Amazing. Well, again, thanks for being on. Thanks for the music for our show. And that will do it for this episode. Thanks to everyone for listening. We would love to hear from you. So please, anyone listening, send us an email at podcast@thehousinginsiders.com. Let us know what you think about this episode and other episodes. And please, if you like what you hear, leave us a review.
And hit subscribe so that all of our episodes show up in your feed. Share our episodes, and make sure you find Kenon out there on Spotify.